Good evening. This is John Milburn for Laws 12066 Land Law. This is week 1 of 2018. We have a number of people online. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Tonight we're dealing with the nature of land. We're talking in a general sense about land law, property law, and some of the relationships that exist within that context. Before we do, as I usually do when commencing a unit, I want to ensure that we're, as it were, on the same page. My aim is to ensure that you have every opportunity to pass and in fact excel in the unit. So I'm keen for you to firstly consider what assessment regime you must undertake and then work towards completing that assessment regime on time to a high quality, and I'm sure that we can all do that. So let me first share the screen to look at the Moodle page, and what you should see now, please correct me if I'm wrong, is the Land Law Moodle page. Does that look like it? All right, good. So 3 assessment pieces. The first due on the 30th of August, the second on the 13th of September, and finally an invigilated examination for 2 hours. Let's look at each of those. The first thing is, for the invigilated examination, I don't yet have a date. We know that you will receive a date for the examination and it will appear sometime during the examination block. If I just pan down the page, you'll see that I've got the dates for each of the weekly sessions through to and including week 12. After week 12, we'll have the review/examination period. So please do your best to look at blocking out a suitable period of time leading up to and during that examination period so that you are ready to sit the invigilated examination at that time. Now, the examination will be for a 2-hour period. It will be 50%, and at this stage, what I'll say is that it will cover the entire scope of the unit. You probably won't like when I say that I have a particular habit of not including optional questions. I generally provide that you answer all the questions on the examination. I might be generous. We'll give you some hints as we go. I may be generous and give you some options, but count on knowing all of the unit. So that's the first thing you need to do. In terms of your preparation for the invigilated examination, may I refer you to this section, Assessments. It's the 3rd block down in Moodle. And for the moment, after you see the summary of the material, have a look at the video that I prepared last year. I've called it Level 3 Examination or Short Window Online Paper Preparation. That will give you some idea of what I think you need to do in terms of preparing for the invigilated examination. Okay, that's probably all I need to talk to you about tonight as far as the exam is concerned. Before we proceed, just to get things going, are there any questions about the invigilated examination? All good? Okay, let's move back to Moodle. And, oh, sorry, there was a question? Yeah.
Sorry, it's Monique. I just
Yes,
typed in
Monique.
the chat box. Just wanting to confirm that the exam is open book, as they generally have been.
Yes, very good question. Thank you. It is an open book examination. I favour open book examinations. The general rule applies that you can't take anything in the examination that will allow you to access the internet. But what it does mean is that you can take in your study guides, you can take in your textbooks, you can take in any other textbook material. In fact, any other printed material that you like, copies of legislation, for example, you can take that in. When you view the video that I've referred you to, you'll see that I encourage you, as best you can, to actually go beyond that and write some draft answers to questions that you think might be on the examination. And bear in mind that I will provide you with some hints, so it's not as daunting necessarily a task as it might seem at the moment. The reason that I mention the exam right at the start is to ensure that you plan for it by having the appropriate booking in your diary. Secondly, that you work towards it. So you have a good idea of, or a very likely idea of, what the examination is going to be about. And then, I don't know, keep an exam book if you like, specifically for exams, and keep notes of any hints that you might pick up on during the course of the exam. But thanks for that question, Monique. Open book exam it is. All right, let's go back to Moodle and consider the second last assessment. I'll share the screen and you should be able to see the Moodle site once again. So the second assessment, or second last assessment, depending on how you look at it, is the assessment item due on the 13th of September, and that's at 11:45 p.m. You'll note there is a cut-off date. The cut-off is such that if you don't submit your work by the 22nd of September, you will receive a nil mark. You can certainly apply for an extension, but because we're raising this on day one, and in fact you know what the question is on day one, the likelihood of succeeding in obtaining an extension is less than it would be. So for example, if you say, I need an extension because I wasn't feeling well on the day before the assessment was due, the likely response will be, well, you felt pretty good leading up to that day before the assessment. So I'm looking at things as from the 12th of July, or even the 9th of July, in fact. So don't mean to be tough, but the reason I'm keen for all the assessment work to come in on time is that people do like to have their results of the assessment and feedback in a timely fashion, to use a lawyer's term. So I need to get the assessments in so I can provide the feedback without feeling as though I'm providing some people with feedback and giving them an unfair advantage if they haven't provided the work to me already. I hope that makes some sense, and I hope you can work with me in that area. But if you do find that it's problematic for you, if you do need an extension, please apply, but just do so knowing that we really would like you to, well, I would like you to submit your work on time. Okay, let's have a look at the actual assessment. I take it you've all looked at the assessment pieces. You can be honest, we've all looked at the assessments. Those of you viewing this at a later time, if you haven't already done so, please do so now. I'll just share the screen once again and we'll look at the second assessment piece. There's a link to it on the top left-hand corner of Moodle. There is also the link under the assessment block, as I mentioned before. I'm just opening the assessment now, taking a while to come up. No, it's coming up on a different screen. So I'll just run through it with you, and I can see it on my screen here. If you have it in front of you, it might be useful to follow along. So this is an assessment where I require you to complete 2,000 words. The dates for the submission and the last cut-off date you know. I do like you to present the work on time. I want you to provide it in a form that is professional in its outlook and manner. So you know that whilst I don't prescribe a particular form for questions typically, I do want you to do it in a format that makes you proud of your work. Please write in the active voice using short sentences. Those of you that have worked with me in the past, you'll know my preferences in that regard. If you're unsure or you want some further feedback about how I like you to write, then please consider a thing called my sample document, which is part of the material that I've provided to help you with assessments. So it should be in that assessment block. Now, in this case, we have an issue with Mr. Choi and Ms. Kim operating from a business premises, and you'll see that it rates to a 7-year lease with a 7-year option and a leased area, and some problems that have arisen in relation to this. Well, I guess I could say it's a small complex. So your task within a very limited number of words is to provide a response to the question, and in this case, the briefing part. The requirement comes to you from the hypothetical partner of the firm, Margaret, who is usually the partner that I ascribe to do this sort of work when setting assessment tasks. All right, are there any questions about the second assessment, the timing, idea of what it is that I want you to prepare, how to upload the work? All good? we've all read it, so we all know what it's about. And of course, you'll need to know what type of lease we're discussing within that context. All right, we'll just briefly look at the first assessment, which is due on the 30th of August, and that's fairly straightforward assessment, I think. Are there any questions about that first assessment piece? I won't go through it in detail. All good? All right. So let's go back to the Moodle page, and I want you to, I won't share the screen on Moodle on this, but I will ask you to do a favour for me. If you're in front of Moodle now, or you're watching this as a recorded session, please go to your Moodle page, and if you would, please click on the uCrew link. Those of you that have used uCrew with me in the past will know what uCrew is all about. Go to the Moodle page, and you'll see, I think directly below the link to this Zoom session is the link to uCrew class discussion. Now, can you all see that? Tell me if you can't. I'm seeing a few puzzled looks. We're right? Okay. And what it should do is, and I'll share the screen for this aspect of it, it should take you through to this page. So are you now seeing on your screen the uCrew land law subjects discussion page? Can you see that? So if you follow the link from Moodle, it should take you straight to this discussion page. You'll see that the top right-hand corner, there's 112 members. So I've registered you all in uCrew. If you're late in the course, the unit rather, you may not be registered yet. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to monitor when people join. There are a few that join late, and they'll be added to it. So the idea is that we exchange information, ideas, questions, materials here in uCrew for the most part. So thank you. There's a question there from Melissa, Kathleen, Siobhan, Sarah are all contributing, Sharon, Leonie. So thank you very much for that. Sorry that if that's a bit blurry as we go down. So the idea is that if you have a question, a comment, if you wish to add something of benefit or interest to the parties, then please add that in. Now there's a question here saying it seems to take me to a page that says signed out. So if you're signed out of your university account, then it won't take you to the page. You need to sign into your university account. Does that answer your question, Scott? Is anyone having difficulty in getting to that uCrew page? It's live now. I'm looking at it, so you can go in, have a look, just type something, just say hi or whatever. You just have to sign in again. It's thank you, Amanda. So is that all easy enough? All right. If you have difficulty, Scott's in now. Okay. Hannah had the same problem, but it should be pretty easy to get there. So if you send me an email asking a question, for example, I will almost certainly respond to that as quickly as I can. But if I think it's a question that would be of benefit for us all to share, and I'll probably ask you to repeat the question in uCrew and I'll repeat my response. Are we happy enough to work that way? So that's where we have our general discussions. In Moodle, I will ask you to provide responses to the weekly problems in the manner that you're, I'm sure, accustomed to doing. So you'll see each week we have the problems, and go in, provide your response, build on the work of each other's, and do that part in Moodle in the familiar method. But there is no Q&A, or there should not be any Q&A link in Moodle itself. That's what uCrew is for here. Okay, and thank you, Justice says, with uCrew, it may take you to the general page. Click on subjects, which is on the left-hand side, and you'll see land law. So in my case, I've got about 20 different units that I am associated with, so I have lots of them, but you should only have a few, and hopefully that's easy to find. Okay, so why do I encourage the use of uCrew? Well, it's really, I suppose, two things. The first is that I don't want to be favouring individual students or seem to be favouring individual students by providing, you know, a detailed and helpful, hopefully, helpful response which others don't share in. The second is that, so if you ask your question in UCREW, I provide the response, everyone gets to see it and indeed build on that response. And it might be, don't be afraid to say, no, I think you're wrong, John, or maybe here's a different approach. And I might say, that's very good. I appreciate that and I like it. The second thing is this, that if we have UCREW as a forum for us all to share and to own, then I want you to feel comfortable in adding material to it. So if, for example, you come across a great article or you find a case that was decided in the High Court last week or something that you think might value add to students, please contribute it yourself. You don't have to ask me, just add it in. Just say, look, here's something that you might find useful. Or, you know, I'm really puzzled by perpetuities. Can anyone reconcile how Section 199 of the Property Law Act works within the general common law concepts? Because it's got me beaten. So, you know, ask a question. I might add a question or a response. Others might come in with a response. So that's the idea of UCREW. All good? Okay. I know that in second year, sorry. Thanks, Kayla. Did you have a question? No, it wasn't Kayla. Did someone have a question? No. All right.
I accidentally unmuted. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, that's fine. And well, I was quick to spot you, wasn't I? And Kayla's going, no,
I know.
it was a mistake. It was a mistake.
It was.
All
Thank
right.
you. Sorry.
No, well, I have to thank you, Kayla, because I think you and Monique are the first two to have unmuted and participated, albeit in your case unwittingly. So I do encourage participation. So feel free to unmute your microphone by mistake or otherwise. Okay. So what are we trying to achieve in this unit? Have a look at the unit profile. You'll get an idea of what we're trying to achieve. But we are looking at the nature of land law, property. It's very broad. It deals with common law, statute, registration, non-registration. It deals with technology, old school materials. It deals with different types of tenure, competing interests between different parties that may have an interest in land or property, you know, such as buyers, sellers, mortgagees, licensees, lessees, holders of restrictive covenants, people who have a profit a prondera, those who have incorporeal hereditaments. That's the only time I'll say that in the whole unit, don't worry. I remember in 1970 something doing land law, and the lecturer really did love talking about incorporeal hereditaments. See, I've broken my promise already. But don't worry, we won't deal with that. It won't be on the exam. So we're trying to identify different types of ownership, tenancy, registration and regulation of property interests, primarily in Queensland. I'm going to jump around a bit tonight, just to keep it lively, keep you on your toes. So here's my first digression. Again, if you've worked with me in the past, you'll know that I say this pretty much every time we start a unit. But again, in the interests of thinking ahead, thinking about how to answer the examination questions, you need to pay particular note of the first word, typically. And there are usually 5 words that might start an invigilated examination question if it's an essay style question. Bit different if it's a problem style question. But if it's an essay style question, you're normally asked to interpret or analyze or evaluate or to infer or to explain. Now, they might all sound the same, but they're a little different. And you need to tailor your response to the question. So interpretation means determining the material facts. Analysing means your ability to identify hidden features. Evaluation is your ability to assess. Inferring is your ability to draw conclusions. And explanation is your ability to communicate something. If you've still got your version of The New Lawyer, have a look at page 290. where that is explained in more detail. All right, back to land law, you'll see that we have 12 weeks, but only 10 subjects, 10 units, sorry, 10 topics. Weeks 11 and 12 are review, so very generous this year. Have a look at the units and have a look at the prescribed reading. Excellent textbook. My recommendation is please read ahead and read widely. If you've worked with me in statutory interpretation, you know when you pick up a piece of legislation, what do? Avoid the temptation of going straight to the section you want. Take a moment to look at all of the headings, get an idea of how the Act is laid out, have a look at the objects of the Act, and then look at the section you want after you've got a better idea of what it's all about. Same with a textbook. Whenever I pick up a textbook, I look at the table of contents, flick through it, get a feel for it, and then you start to read the part that you need. I hope that makes some sense. All right, so legal research. I did a series of legal research videos. Dr. Marinak has done some as well. So there's a lot of really good material out there in terms of legal research. By second year, I'm sure we all know where to go to look for legal research. You will need to go beyond the textbook and the supplementary in order to do well in this unit. So we all know the difference between authorised and non-authorised materials. Feel free to say no if you don't, but I'll expect that you do. So, you know, with legislation in Queensland, go to the Legislation Queensland for the authorised commentary. That will also have valuable information in terms of, say, Gazette information, information about bills, information about how to read legislation as well. Otherwise, you can go to Austlii for the unauthorised material, which is still very good. You should all know how to use NoteUp or case citators. If you don't, do some private study in terms of legal research. I will upload my legal research videos. If you need a refresher, have a look at those or some other form of material or ask questions. And if you're really a bit embarrassed to ask through UCrew, maybe you could just send me a quick email and I'll point you in the right direction. But I do want you to be able to access research material. You should all know your way around the CQU online library. If not, please ask for some help. Just a quick poll. You can answer yes or no to this, and it's really designed to get you moving. How many of you subscribe to daily or weekly material from, say, Barnett Jade? Who gets updates sent to their ebook, to the email? 1, yes, yes, yes. We've got 4 yes, and nobody is admitting to they don't. So those of you who do you find it useful? I mean, I do. I think it's great. So it's a loaded question, but yes. So we're getting a few. Yep. So I think it's fair to say that all the ones who said I do subscribe through Jade Barnett or Barnett Jade, and I receive daily updates or weekly updates, find it useful. You can understand the power of having an answer in your invigilated examination where you have referred to a High Court decision handed down the week before the exam. I mean, that's going to look great. It'll make you feel good. So you can code in what is of interest to you and the material that you receive will only be for that area. Okay. And one said used to, but not anymore, but may get back into it. So, all right. So Barnett Jade, keep that in mind. Other useful materials through court websites. Now, we all know the Australian Guide to Legal Citations. I don't need to remind you about that, do I? Footnote referencing. Everyone should know how to use footnote referencing, should know the mechanics of it. If you don't, please ask now. Make sure that you include the superscript after and not before relevant punctuation. So it's full stop and then your superscript, not the other way around. Just a little quirk of mine that I like to see it done correctly. If you have trouble with the Australian Guide to Legal Citations, there's a lot of good material, just ask. Now, I take it everyone has the prescribed textbook. I would also recommend you get the supplementary text, which is LexisNexis Questions and Answers. And the previous text questions are very good as well. Okay, any questions so far? We'll keep moving. In terms of conveyancing, there is a separate unit, Laws 12059. Some of you may be doing conveyancing as well as land law. You'll be aware that when we talk about REIQ contracts within the context of buying or selling property or land, then we're talking about those contracts that are through the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, which are co-developed with the Queensland Law Society. Whenever you're dealing with a question that relates to land law, you need to consider issues to do with ethics. So who can tell me where is a good place to look for material about ethical obligations? You know, for example, in the assessment, there might be some issues about ethical issues. Solicitors' conduct rules, that's very good. We can go beyond that, so thank you, Scott. Where else do we look for ethical material? QLS, thank you, Sarah. The Queensland Law Society has excellent material in relation to ethics. Okay, and also there is the Legal the Legal Profession Act, 2007. How many of you are members, student members of the Queensland Law Society, just as an aside? It costs not much. We're getting a no, a yes. Karen, Far North Queensland, very good. I'd recommend you consider it. So all you need to do is go on the Queensland Law Society site, click on how to become a student member. It'll take you to a link. It's pretty easy to apply, and you'll find yourself with lots of up-to-date resource material through the Queensland Law Society. Okay, key legislation in this unit, you'll need to know and have a look at the Land Title Act, have a look at the Retail Shop Leases Act, Body Corporate and Community Management Act, the Property Law Act. Have you been able to follow me so far? Have a look at the Planning Act 2016. Have a look at the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, which is Commonwealth, and I've mentioned the Legal Profession Act. They're key pieces of legislation. There are more, and we will talk about those as we progress. Property law, land law, is a hybrid because it deals with property, but within the context of other legal disciplines or other legal areas. For example, an obvious one is contract law. So we can't talk about property law without also talking about contract law. A good example of that, say, is and also statutes can affect the general contract law or the common law. For example, have a look at Section 59 of the Property Law Act. If there's any conveyancers out here, they might know what Section 59 of the Property Law Act says. And to give a hint, it's something to do with the requirement for contracts to be in a certain form. It has to be in writing. Thank you, Jessica. Otherwise, it won't apply. So when we talk about land law, we need to consider contract law, but we have to consider statutory requirements. And we have to also consider ethical issues, and we have to consider, you know, some of the pro formas that I mentioned about REIQ contracts. The other thing is that when you're talking about land law, there are a range of courts and tribunals that may have jurisdiction to deal with particular issues. Now, just ask some questions, fire in with some responses. If you sought an order for specific performance of a contract, which courts or tribunal would you consider appropriate to bring your application? Now, I'm bringing in some equity here. All right, so we're getting Supreme Court, QCAT Supreme. Now, bear in mind, there is no equity division of the Supreme Court. The divisions of the Supreme Court are It's general jurisdiction and it's appeal jurisdiction. Okay, whoops. So the answer is supreme. Maybe district can provide you with an order for specific performance. What if you've got a dispute in relation to a mining lease? Where would you deal with that issue? Which court? Federal court, land court, P&E court, federal court, P&E court, P&E being planning and environment. Some good answers there. I'm going to give it to Gregory, land court. Very good. Okay, so land court. Next one. We have an issue in relation to a commercial building dispute for $1 million, and it's a shopping centre dispute, not planning and environment, but actual between the contractor. Which court? Supreme, Supreme, Supreme. Yeah, I agree with that, Supreme Court. We have a dispute between a contractor and the owner of property in relation to a residential dwelling, $1 million contract to build a house on a property. Which court? Trick question. Oh, we're quiet on that one. It's a trick question because I should also say or tribunal. As soon as I say tribunal, you'll get it. QCAT, yes, correct. Or NCAT if you're in New South Wales, yes. QCAT in Queensland. All right, what if you have an issue where you are acting for a party who is being prosecuted for an environmental offence as a result of breaching the Vegetation Management Act in Queensland? Which court? Planning and environment, magistrates, P&E, magistrates. I'm going to give it to the magistrates court. There is also the jurisdiction for it to go to the planning and environment court, or more likely the district court, but really the magistrates court. Okay, you're doing well, but we're not finished yet. Let me think of some others. What if you have an issue regarding an objection to a planning application, and you are an objector and you don't like the way that this land is being used or proposed to be used? Where would you bring your application, your objection? District? Standing. Oh, good question, good response. You've got to make sure you've got standing to object. P&E? I'm going to go with the P&E court on that one as well. Okay, so the reason I'd raise those issues now is this. When you're doing your reading, I want you to be proactive in terms of your reading and think about how you would bring this action or seek the remedy that relates to land law, and importantly, what court, what jurisdiction would you implement or argue this matter in front of? So what we don't want is a dry subject where you're simply repeating material in an academic sense. I want this to be real. And the reason that I frame the second assessment, for example, on the basis of you're actually acting for a client now who's got a real problem, is you have to think about the law, you have to think about contract equity, other issues, but importantly, you have to think about the jurisdiction within which the argument will take place. What happens if you're acting for a party who's selling property and somebody's come along and lodged a caveat on the title, and you say, I don't want that caveat to be there. Get rid of it. We're about to settle. How would you get rid of a caveat? Some of you might say, what's a caveat? Well, this is a conveyancing type question. Supreme Court, yes. I like that response. Okay. Apply to the Supreme. You might even be able to get away with the district, but certainly the Supreme Court. Okay, so different, okay, so no, there's a little bit more, I'll give you a bit more. What if you've got a dispute in relation to a commercial lease and it relates to an industrial property? So someone has a 10-year lease over industrial land at Acacia Ridge. You're acting for the tenant and you've got a dispute and you're claiming damages for something that the landlord has done. Which court? And you're claiming, say, $1 million. Supreme Court? Yep. What if that dispute relates to a retail shop lease dispute? Still, $1 million claim. You're acting for someone who, District Court, NCAT, which would also be QCAT in Queensland. So this is a retail shop lease dispute. Not many responses coming in. I've got one for the District Court and one for NCAT. Is there a tribunal? Yeah, you're on the right track. Which tribunal? There's really only one big one now in Queensland. It used to be the Retail Shop Leases Tribunal, but in 2009, it, with 28 other tribunals, merged to become the Super Tribunal, as it was called. QCAT, exactly. Okay. So if you've got a retail shop lease dispute and you're claiming damages for loss of income, for example, as a result of something that the landlord did, then you would claim that in QCAT. Now, part of the reason I'm saying this is, as I said, you need to be real about this. You need to understand the jurisdictional issues. But when it comes to research, you need to have a look in the right spot. And it may be that you're reading Supreme Court cases from, Victoria, or like even from England. Might be some House of Lords decisions. You're trying to apply that in a Queensland retail shop lease context. You really should be looking at the QCAT decisions in relation to leasing matters so that it's more relevant. Okay, so that's a selection of some of the issues to do with land law, property law, dealing with disputes, and ensuring that you go to the right jurisdiction. Thank you for participating in that part. Let's just talk about the way in which you answer problem-based questions in land law. So I guess everyone, when they look at a question, thinks IRAC or CIRAC or whatever acronym you want. So issues, rules, application, and conclusion. That's good, but I'll just warn you that I have a preference against slavishly using that thought process. It's an excellent thought process, and I certainly, when I was doing Introduction to Law, would teach it. And I think you've got to be mindful of the issues, think about the rules, how to apply it, and come to a conclusion. But don't feel as though you must slavishly have those headings. In fact, I think that detracts a bit because it doesn't happen in real life. So just keep it in mind as a thought process, but don't actually go through it that way. Now let's apply that thought process to a property law or land law related type concept. The one I've selected to consider is the acquisition of property compulsorily on just terms. You've all seen The Castle, you know what I'm talking about? Okay, if you haven't seen The Castle, please do so. All right, so we're talking about the acquisition of property compulsorily by the Crown or the government, and it must do so on just terms. Where is that law based? Where do we find that basic premise, that basic law? Constitution, very good. Can we advance on that? Constitution, do we know the section number? You don't have to worry about the subsection, but just the general section. 51, thank you very much. Okay, so 51, subsection 31 provides, Gregory got it just on the buzzer, provides that if there is an acquisition of property, it must be on just terms. So the first thing we need to do, though, is in the context of land law, if you're acting for someone who is saying, I want compensation for the acquisition of property, is what is property? Now that's kind of a general topic here. We're talking land law, which is another way of talking real property, but what is property? So let's look at that example in this context. We need to consider what is the nature of the entitlement being acquired. Is it really property? Because the concept of property carries with it some connotation that we're talking about something permanent and secure. In other words, when we're talking about land law, it may be that we're distinguishing between ownership, whatever that might be, because it's not really ownership in land law, as opposed to a permit or a license or a lease. So a leading case is the Environmental Protection Agency against Authority against Rashleigh, R-A-S-H-L-E-I-G-H. This is not strictly examinable. It's unlikely to be on the exam, but I'm just using it as an example of how we have to think about land law as being very broad. So in this case in 2005, the court held that the owner or lessee of land, while they have a right to access water that may flow through it, does not actually have property in the water. Does that make sense? So when we're talking land law, we're talking property, we're talking ownership, a whole lot of different things we have to consider here. So in that case, they said, no, you just because you're restricted as a result of licensing regime and you can't take all the water you want any longer because we're stopping you from doing it, that doesn't mean we have to pay you just terms compensation for the loss of your property because you never owned that property. You didn't own the water that was flowing through. Do you see the difference there? So can anyone tell me, following on from that logic, when it comes to ownership, in inverted commas, of land, are there any other restrictions on what you think you own the land, but do you really own the land? Are there any restrictions, things that you don't actually own? Oh, I've stumped you with this one. No, here we go. Mining rights, fixtures, above and below, easements, airspace. Some good answers coming through here. I'm going to give that one to Karen. Thank you, Karen, for that response. I was actually thinking mineral rights and petroleum. However, those answers where you talk about particularly things above and below are also correct. So why is it that you don't necessarily own the right to minerals and petroleum if it's below you, if it's below your land? Surely you have that right, don't you? And if not, what stops you from having that right? Any thoughts? Is it the Constitution? Ah, the Crown has the right. Excellent. That's exactly what I wanted to see. I wanted to see the words the Crown come through. Do we know what the Crown is? Can anyone describe it to me? I find it a really difficult concept. The Queen, yes. I was thinking about the Queen saying, that's my minerals, that's my petroleum, I'm going to dig it up. But yes, basically the federal government. The way I like to think of it is this, that, you know, governments come and go, don't they? But it's a bit like members of a family in a household. So you've got a household and members of the family come and go in that household, don't they? You know, one year the kids are here, then they're not, then they come back, they've had a separation, whatever. So members of the household come and go. So the household is like the crown. It's kind of like the general concept, and the individuals that come and go is more like the government. Yes, I will be courteous in terms of that. I mean, no discourtesy. All right, so when it comes to dealing with reservations, there is the reservations to the Crown, which I suppose is, if you like, the government, and that particularly relates to mineral and petroleum. Can anyone tell me where there's an obvious statement to that effect on a very common form of document that relates to property? Where is it that it says you own the property, but you don't own the minerals and you don't own the petroleum? The title. The contract is another option coming through. I like the title on that one. So when you look at has anyone actually looked at a title deed? Is there anyone lucky enough that they've paid off their mortgage and they've got their title deed? They've said, I can see it. Yes? Had one. All right. So if you do a title search, or if you look at a title deed, if it's a paper title, you'll see that there is a reservation section. Reservations. So consider that because you don't actually own all the land. Now, what about those that people who said, well, what about above? So we talked about below. What about above? Do you own the airspace above you? No, I think that's right. To a point, says Amanda. So, when we're talking about land or we're talking about property, it's not as clear cut as you might think in terms of, well, that's my land, I own it. There are reservations. You've got to think about these things and always think in terms of where would I go to deal with a dispute if there was a dispute in relation to these issues. Think about legislation. Also, when it comes to ownership, rather than just looking at issues to do with vertical separation, there are other issues. Statutes, for example, like the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, which provides a mechanism for the government to join with states and territories to provide schemes to protect the environment. So within the context of using land, property, there are issues that arise when it comes to the way in which you can use the land, manage the land, use and deal with issues to do with plants and animals and development and issues to do with conservation. All right, I think we've probably gone long enough for tonight. I wanted to cover some more, but I get caught up with things, sorry. So, Karen, did you have a question?
It was actually a question that somebody else raised on UCrew, and I don't think you've had a chance to answer it yet. Under the materials for this week's lecture were some PowerPoints, but there was no pre-recorded lecture to go with it.
No, thank you. And actually, I did. I think I did finally get to that answer. What I propose to do this term is, because I'm looking after Dr. Nankaro's subject, just this unit. I'm just going to create my own lectures, which will be the live sessions. So it will just be the one lecture/tutorial, which is the live session, which I will upload. So I hope that answers your question, Karen. Okay. Any other questions, comments? All good? Okay. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm very pleased we had a good roll-up, and I hope that we can have good roll-ups each week. All the best, and we'll see you next week. Bye then.